Hi, and welcome to CMO Journeys. I'm Christian Panak, and on this show, I talk with the marketing leaders behind some of today's most interesting brands. We get into their career paths, how they think about marketing, and how they work with agencies. Today's guest is Hilary Sauls, Chief Marketing Officer for the Armstrong Company, a Memphis-rooted, family-built relocation and logistics business that's quietly grown into a 36-market, full-service platform spanning home moves, commercial relocation, warehousing, and final-mile logistics. What makes Hilary's perspective rare is that she's been inside the building for almost 14 years, working her way from marketing coordinator all the way to the CMO. Right as Armstrong has stepped into a new generation of leadership and acquisitions, please welcome Hilary Sauls.
Thanks so much, Christian. Happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about, since this is CMO Journeys, where'd you grow up? What kind of kid were you when you were young?
Yeah. So I actually born and raised in Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana, so southwest corner. And I was into lots of different things from every sport under the sun. My parents wanted me to have exposure to everything. So no matter what I found myself doing in life and whatever the invitation was at the time, that I would be familiar with the sport and be able to participate and play with a baseline knowledge. And then after realizing quickly I'm really not an athlete, I was also very actively engaged in music and art. So lots of different art camps. I played piano most of my life. Was a great chess club player at one time and junior high. And then math was also a strong suit for me. So I really kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything. Student council leadership was important to me at the time, but always a fan of sports in terms of watching sports, and really rooted my allegiance to LSU and the collegiate fandom world that entails is certainly one that rooted me, and my passion for sports PR, which was a path that I really was focused on early on.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were able to parlay some of that interest into some of your early steps in your career. I think you went from PR at LSU, then to the New York Giants,
Yeah.
and then eventually doing some work with Northwestern Mutual. Tell us a little bit about those early years.
Yeah, I was passionate. I went into college, unlike some individuals, I knew exactly what I wanted and chased it. So I was very determined and worked my way through the athletic department and networking and establishing some relationships that afforded me connections to a variety of individuals across the NFL. And I was bound and determined that my summer going into my senior year of college, I was going to have an internship out of state, and it was going to be in the realm of sports. So through that journey, I ended up sending letters to numerous general managers, scouts, you name it, variety of coaches across the NFL. And I heard back from a handful of them. A couple wanted me to take a full time opportunity that I certainly wasn't interested in. And turns out the Giants had an opportunity and found my way to New York right after they won the Super Bowl, which was phenomenal. And it was an incredible experience. I learned so much. I went out on a leap of faith, knew no one, and really have never worked so hard in my life. It was quite a busy season, but it was one that really taught me in that training camp time frame that I was not going to be fulfilled long term. And I had all the access that I dreamed of having to connections that would afford me opportunities longer term, post college. And I left feeling this empty pit of, oh my goodness, now what? I still have a passion for that. And by all means, I'm so grateful for that experience, but recognized early on that one, regionally speaking, I had limitations and I really wanted to stay in the Southeast. That was important to me. And two, more importantly, when I think about self actualization and what's most meaningful to me in my work, in my career, and my contribution to those around me and the society around me and how I play a role, it's so valuable to me to see impact of my work and that return on my time and investment wasn't going to be realized in that arena. I wanted to think more creatively. I wanted to have more strategic thinking in my day to day work, and I was not going to get that. So I had to take a step back going into my senior year of college, which was the week I returned from camp. And that was a journey for me. It really helped me process my why and what was really meaningful to me. I considered Teach for America. That was quite a path for me also in that senior year, and going into graduation of my spring semester of college, I realized that maybe Teach for America wasn't the path, and I ended up with an offer that I unfortunately had to turn down. And I stepped back and said, okay, now what? What's next? It was the recession, which was not a great time to be graduating, and it certainly was trying. I was overqualified for numerous entry level positions and internships, and yet didn't have that 3 to 5 year experience either. So quite a challenging time, but one that allowed me to stop and reflect and recognize that, hey, look, it's time for me to go into grad school. So I had that year gap and went into grad school. I knew business was really going to be the path. That was going to be where I had the most opportunity to have cross-functional impact and really leverage my communication skills in a different way. So I went down that path, ended up finishing up grad school at Ole Miss after 1 full year, which was incredible, but also incredibly trying. I don't know how people go back to school, frankly, after being in their full-time career for so long. I was out for 1 year, and going back was so challenging. So from there, I recognized too that maybe my skill set could be applied in a lot of different areas that I hadn't yet considered. So the transferable skill set of the communication piece and marketing piece that I hadn't considered was recruiting. And I had an opportunity to do that at Northwestern Mutual, which was an incredible journey as well in terms of establishing a network, really understanding how to build a network in a city like Memphis that I had no connections and no network established. So developing those centers of influence was very valuable. I really enjoyed my work and getting to stay connected to college campuses, really pour into students and help them understand the importance and value of internships, something that I was very passionate about and I feel served me well. And being able to give back to them in that way was rewarding on a lot of levels. What I also learned was I needed to do more in the field of marketing communication. Again, back to that really critical piece of what matters to me and how I feel I can best serve those around me. And that was not going to be achieved in that arena. So heard from Armstrong, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and here we are, right? That's where I'd love to poke at next, because you joined Armstrong in 2012 as
Yeah,
a marketing coordinator.
that's right.
And here we are about 14 years later, and now you're the CMO. Same building, more than a dozen years later. I think there's been some like 6 different titles.
Yeah,
That's a unique career arc.
it really is.
Yeah,
It
how do you
really
tell that
is.
story? I mean, was that the goal when you started, to be the CMO, or did
You
that
know,
just
it's
keep growing on you?
it's really interesting that you say that. And when I think back to my younger self, back to understanding where I see myself growing, when I, you know, took out that vision of going to sports PR and replaced it with a more meaningful role in corporate America at the time for me, it was more of a C-level position within marketing. What that looked like at that time is certainly not what has transpired since. However, it's really fascinating to reflect back and to realize, wow, okay, this is not what I expected and anticipated. I think part of that is given that we are in a family owned business that is really unique in structure. We run very lean. So I work within a shared services environment. So we support our entire portfolio of operating companies and equity partners. And what that looked like coming in was really aligning from a values perspective at the foundation. I hadn't heard of moving in storage industry and the opportunities and logistics and whatnot really at all until that point. In fact, I was in a wonderful building, a beautiful space in the financial services industry, as you can imagine. And I left that space and went to an undesirable area of town, if you will, that frankly, the building was old, right? The investment was more in the equipment, how we're serving our customers. Our customers aren't coming to our building. The warehouse is where we invest time, effort, energy. And so it was not something that I valued as an individual. Instead, I valued the values of the company and what that meant. And so once I aligned on that front, the opportunities were endless. I remember coming in and really stopping and pausing to say, is this legitimate company? I'm worried about the website. I really have so many questions. I'm kind of fooled here. This just seems off. And instead of seeing it as the barrier, when the light went off, to see it as this is my opportunity to mold and to shape and to build, this is my home, it really paved the way for an incredible journey. So really coming in and supporting primarily our national account B2B sales force. And at that time, our portfolio was completely different than what it is today in terms of the core service offerings and really where we're seeing our opportunities. At that time, I think we had 21 locations and markets, and now we're up to 36. And the vision for growth has been there from day one, and to see it continually come into fruition with all the different transactions and acquisitions, it's really been remarkable for such an old company to continue to do that in this space. So it's one of those things that I tell people often. The industry found me. I didn't find the industry, and I think you would hear that from a number of people in this space. But I think the other part that's so unique is the lean operation that we have. I didn't have a path that was clear in terms of growth for distinctive roles within the organization. And what I mean by that is no role that I have held after the first role initially existed before me, right? And so it was unique for me to wrap my mind around that. It certainly, again, was not in that linear path up the chain like I envisioned as a young kid, but here we are, and it's certainly rewarding. And I would say it's probably more rewarding because, again, it's part of that shaping and molding and being part of what matters. And look, at the end of the day, the work is what matters, right? It's the opportunity to have a voice at the table. What is your span of voice? What is your span of share of that voice at the table? And how are you leveraging that? And what are you doing to continue to bring ideas and execute them? So that was ultimately what I seek to achieve. And the roles just come with it. That's just more of a necessary piece.
Yeah, wow. Seizing the opportunity and creating the opportunity in
Yeah.
many ways. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. So you're stepping into this role really at a moment that the Armstrong companies has also announced, from what I understand, a new CEO, some new co-chairs,
Yeah.
CHRO, a CSO. It's a lot of leadership oxygen in the room at once.
Yeah.
Where are you feeling like the pressure coming from for you inside that transition? Is it the CEO? Is it the board? Is it, the family, the market itself?
I think it's a season, right? And family owned businesses generationally, look, we are so fortunate to have had such generational involvement in our business. I mean, our third generation CEO prior to the one in position now, he held lots of positions that started out in operations, started on the trucks, and rose his way to the top. In this environment, the expectation is not that one comes in and just holds a seat. You have to come in and understand the business. And so I think that idea of corporate hierarchy and leadership is certainly not one that holds true in our world. it's relevant. Like I said, it's important, it's necessary from a structural perspective. But when you think about the individuals in our C suite at the moment, you have an individual who is the CEO currently, who came in a claims management role, and he came in through the billing and accounting and rating, and worked his way into operations and dispatch, and then ran our Memphis operating company, and then really has held a number of operational roles since then. And so his knowledge base and understanding of the business is second to none. And it made sense, right? He was groomed for this. When we think about those who come into our organization within our respective operating companies, similar paths of those who come up through the business typically have a greater understanding of how the business needs to be run. And that's, I think in a lot of different ways, what we find very successful in a number of other industries and companies at large. But in ours, we have had some shaping and molding in the C suite over time that has kind of ebbed and flowed. And again, it's one of those things where we're such an old company by all intents and purposes, a 70-year-old business. Next year will be our 70th anniversary. And having that rooted family values, we really haven't come into our prime, right? We're still getting there. And so we're still really grooming ourselves to be a real titan in the space. While some view us as that today, we have such grand plans, and I think we're kind of putting the pieces in place to take us to the next level. And for us, it's not necessarily a swapping out of seats and reshaping and molding of an existing team, but rather continuing to evolve and adapt our players who have strengths and assets and skills that we can leverage given where we are today as a business and what the market commands. And so, I think it's different perhaps than what you may envision in a corporate hierarchy within a publicly held company for
Sure.
some for all
Sure. So as think about your aspirations,
yeah.
and everybody kind of new coming in,
Yeah.
where do you foresee marketing playing a role in getting to that level in the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, here's the reality. We have positioned ourselves in an incredible environment as one of the largest asset-based providers of services. What that means is we've got men, we have trucks, we have warehouses. And if you combine those in various ways, that's very unique in terms of your ability to do that at scale. And when we talk about that, we're really able to bring full solutions to so many different industries that many in our space aren't able to do from beginning to end of a given project, whether it's construction, whether it's hospitality, whether it's healthcare, you name it, supply chain, e-commerce. We can really provide significant value in many different verticals with our own assets. Now, what that also means is within our structure, we have historically maintained unique operating companies in every market. There's a common thread of values, and certainly majority ownership is held through the families. However, we have an opportunity to market ourselves in a more meaningful way to represent the true value that we bring to those clients at scale who have national needs across the US, multi market needs. What that means also is that we need to help shift the mindset of some of our historical buyers to understand our brand and our proposition as one that is so different than a household mover. that's been our bread and butter for so many decades. And that's no longer a significant portion of our portfolio. It merely represents 30% of our business mix. So, really catching up to our portfolio, if you will, from a marketing perspective, and changing that mindset and associating our brand with a full service in logistics, supply chain is much more of a challenge than it has been in the past because of that association in our brand with a van line and a household name. So we're overcoming those challenges, we'll say, from a marketing perspective to really pivot and not abandon that piece of the business because that's still such an important part of who we are and what we do, but it's no longer the majority. So sure. We're really taking this plan and strategy to represent more than a mover and do that in a way that resonates with a new audience or an audience who we've really tapped into, I don't want to say by accident, but who really we have not fully tapped to this point. Now, our rebranding really has helped kind of tee us up for that. And we're still in the process. That rolled out the beginning of 2023. That was a significant initiative for us. And it was really setting the stage. We don't move quickly. Traditionally, we haven't moved quickly, I should say. We're really working to move more quickly. And what we need to do is finish rolling out these branded assets that we're turning over with the new brand with consistency. That's a challenge from a marketing perspective for us, given our structure. So getting arms around that and again, being more purposeful and proactive rather than reactive to the market. Again, that's not been something that the company itself has done for many years, for decades, really. And now we have an opportunity to flip that script and be more proactive in our marketing strategy and really leverage what we offer.
Right. So as you think about that, obviously you'd mentioned things might not move as fast as you hoped all the time. How do you decide what capabilities that you want to build internally versus maybe bringing in outside partners or agencies that can add leverage?
What a great question. I'll be honest, Christian, I have done this historically throughout my career at Armstrong, where you go back and forth, insource, outsource. And I currently have 3 outsourced partners. And they are subject matter experts in their respective areas, as opposed to a full service marketing firm who might fractionally provide work in a given area. That's where I am in this season. Previously, I was down a path of more of an full agency approach. Whenever we went out, and that was challenging for me, I realized, I think, again, over time, I think it's understanding in that partnership, one, your investment, what you're willing to invest in your talent internally. Again, back to running lean and mean, we traditionally don't have extremely deep bench strength. And so relying on outside partners, I found to be a lot more effective in numerous areas, particularly in this digital space that continues to rapidly change and evolve right in front of us. And I think having the ability to tap into a team as opposed to an individual significantly changes the game for you. I think having someone that's an extension of your team is probably more critical because not all partners serve as a real extension of your team. And I've experienced that as well. And I think it really boils down to understanding what is the skill set of those individuals that align at the core and foundationally, where you feel not necessarily matches, but complements your own, and then where you can bring partners to be exponentially complementary and not overlap. And again, it's a balance. There are times when, I think I like to think of us as Swiss Army knives, where we can really be utility players. And in our world, because we're lean, you need to be able to be strategic and tactical, and you flip flop all day long, which it can be exhausting. But if I find myself living too much in one specific area of marketing, that's my sign. And either it's the sign that the individual I have does not have the ability to really take that on, whether that's a workload management, prioritization issue, or it's truly a gap. And therefore, we need to make sure that we have a partner who can really fill that gap. And so, going through that issue processing of what we need to solve for takes some time, but I think that's a key piece to really evaluate your partnerships and where you can squeeze the best value. So, in doing that, I've always gone out to RFP. That's important to me. I think that's as a steward of the business, that's really important for anyone in any functional role. But I think the conversations on the front end to determine who you bring to that process is just as critical, and pre-vetting those individuals. And so I've always done that. I've done that for every service, every project that I've hired an external party for, and really go through the whole process. I bring in cross functional leaders to participate at the end. I make sure the decision is not my own, but there's a fine line of objectivity. And then also alignment. That's a big one. Cost is important, but honestly, if I'm trusting you, I feel very adamant that you would be someone I'd hire and not just hire fractionally. So if you're not a fit. And that's, again, part of our culture internally. And what I think is important, back to what I said initially, and part of how I came into the business, is that foundational alignment of the company's values and your own personal values. When it's not aligned, it's apparent. And I think that's the same for partners. When I've compromised there, I've realized it and I've had to make a change, which happens with external partnerships. And sometimes it happens when, there's changes on their end too. But I think it ebbs and flows for each company. It's hard to say. For me, it started with just digital marketing. Now it's expanded. I've got a PR team that has a few hours. I've got a video and photography team. I've got, they also handle some social media for us. And then I've also got an SEO and ad management team.
Sure. As you think about that, pitch and kind of RFP process you've done in the past, I'd be curious if you could give an example of maybe one of the partners you have now or a past partner that has, done really well and what made them stand out. And then maybe the opposite, maybe where you see some of these agencies fall flat.
Yeah. Yeah. What I think is fascinating going through that process. So we are on the receiving end of RFPs daily. And so I think having that exposure as a recipient, I have a different perspective perhaps, and maybe a different level of expectation in what I would think someone would respond to an RFP with. So when I am building out an RFP, I think I really work to build it out in a way that I've got an apples to apples comparison. What kills me being on the receiving end is that you're teed up to essentially, you essentially create your own. And whenever it gets into marketing, holy cow, these agencies, they get even more creative on their responses and what it looks like and giving you the fluff. And I can't tell you how frustrating it is to have to go back and cull through the process and really say, okay, now let me get some clarification questions for this company. And now let me get different ones for this, because they never initially answer the question directly. They danced around it, and I sniffed it out pretty easily. So what I would say is answer the question. Giving a marketing proposal, and I can't tell you how many have given me 100 pages of just presentation material, sometimes even getting to access it because they want to use their fancy link and send me into their proposal world that they're proud of. Great. I care about the look and feel, but frankly, I need this information. And if you're making it hard for me to get the information that I asked you for, are you even going to listen to me as a partner? And that is indicative of someone who is probably not a best fit. Now, I would say the other piece of it is presentation. So I've had some situation, I would say one situation in particular where I had an existing partner and I knew going in that they were not going to, it was around our brand strategy. And I went out to bid because, again, back to what the fractional time was that this particular agency spent with branding. I felt that it was very important that I selected someone to be a partner who was doing this every day, who really had a solid understanding. It wasn't a fractional piece of their work, it was the complete work that they did every day. And so when I went through the exercise, I included this other firm and I was really disappointed. One, they didn't clearly answer questions as an existing partner. They took the relationship for granted, is really what it boiled into. And then when it came into the presentation, it was lackluster. They really didn't even make a complete presentation in their best and final. And they did not follow up with pointed questions and commitments they had made to answer information in their presentation. The lack of follow up is an absolute no brainer for me. You're out. Again, back to what are you going to do for us as a partner and throughout the course of the project? If I can't trust you to follow up, if I can't rely on you to do that on your own accord, I don't have time to babysit. I don't want to micromanage. I need a real partner. And to me, that's not a great partnership. So that was really probably one of the most significant examples. I've seen a few others where I've gotten a glimpse of the business on the front end in that diligence stage before I went out to RFP to really kind of get an understanding. Does this even make sense? I don't want to waste their time. Is this even a valuable partnership that I could foresee? And if not, why bring them into RFP? So in that process, I've had different companies give me their spiel. I explain to them, hey, look, I'm going to have a formal RFP here. And then they come back around and I kid you not, identical presentation. And I thought, you didn't even bother to tailor this. You didn't even bother to go through the process. You really are just cookie cuttering your way through it. What are you going to do with our project? What are you going to do with our work? Is that going to be tailored to us? Are you going to take time to really understand us? Or are you just going through the motions for what you think should be the case and what makes it easy for you? So that's probably the most negative experiences that I can recall at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I think there's good advice. I've unfortunately been involved in some of those situations
Yeah.
myself on both ends. But yeah, it's a great reminder for everybody. So we're getting close to the end here, and I got one more question, and I'd love to give you the opportunity to answer this. So, what's one misconception about moving in logistics that you'd love to just kill on this podcast right now? Maybe it's something agencies or marketers or buyers consistently get wrong about a company like the Armstrong Company.
Oh man, just one, huh? I will say the idea that you can pack whatever you're packing, product, household goods at origin, and go from point A to point B in a very linear fashion. So that to me is a very a very big misconception and one that I didn't fully appreciate. And heck, being a consumer, I think I would still be challenged just with my own personality to really process that. But when you think about all of the regulations that we're under, and you think about equipment, you think about fuel, you think about, again, these hours of service that these guys are relegated to, who are out on the road, it's certainly not linear. And so we've got to be able to fill up a load and really maximize our capacity. And it's certainly not because we can't give a commitment for commitment's sake. It's certainly not for customer experience sake. It's simply because it's the way the business operates. And so, for someone to be frustrated, especially going into summertime at this point in time with delivery spreads, there's a reason for that. Now in logistics world, that's a little more controlled, again, because you're typically staying put. You're not having to fill that, and you're certainly handling that in a little bit different manner. But when it comes to household goods, it's not that simple. And crossing state lines is a big journey. And it's a big journey for not only the individuals moving, but for our drivers who are entrusted with the goods and working to get it there safely. So that's one of many that I can share.
Yeah, as you describe that, it reminds me of the nonlinear buyer journey that customers, are taking. And you would love to think it's A, B, and C. Show your ad, they buy, but there's a lot of steps in the middle. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think that's a great way to end here. So Hilary, thanks again for the conversation and the insights. To everybody watching, don't forget to follow CMO Journeys for more conversations with the marketing leaders that are shaping what's next. I'm Christian Badak. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.